around 2017, kind of gradually going vegetarian because um, I kind of just felt bad for the animals. I didn't feel right, eating something I couldn't kill, and I thought that that was okay. And then my sister went vegan around 2019 and kind of explained to me the dairy and egg industry and how it also affects the animals. And so from then, kind of decided, I'm gonna go vegan as well. That's me.
That sounds amazing. Would any of the other speakers like to go next?
I'll go next. That's a great intro, by the way. Hi, everyone. My name is Isaiah Hernandez. I'm currently residing on Lenape land in the greater New York City area. I'm an environmental educator, creator, career-bound vegan. And for me, I like to provide just introductory forms of environmentalism for people online through colorful graphics, visuals, and digital storytelling. I think for me, my vegan journey kind of started back in college too, where I had a sister too that was vegan way before me. So she had been vegan for like 8 years. And so she'd always send me videos on Instagram of like animals being slaughtered, telling me like, like to go. But I think for me, what really made me go understood for me, like how can I divest or remove myself away from these extractive, harmful, cruel industries that punish animals, that slaughter them, but also punish migrant farm workers here in the United States. And a brief background is that undocumented farm workers here in the United States, many of them are undocumented. Many of them face a lot of injustices in the system. And so the industrial agriculture for me is an environmental pollutant to this ecological crisis. And so for me, I look for ways to dismantle that through education, but also to provide people to extend themselves to animal rights, because I think what is often forgotten a lot in certain spaces is non-human animals or humans. And so for me, I advocate for both living beings in this world and also understanding how I can become a better advocate for non-human animals. So thank you.
Okay, that's a great introduction. Olivia, would you like to go next?
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Olive. I'm an educational YouTuber and I create content in which I try new ways to improve ourselves, and then I review the results and give tips about what I learned from the experience, and that includes veganism. So in my YouTube channel, I talk about environmental issues, specifically about veganism. I also co-founded Arise Arose, which is an organization that initiates discussions and spreads knowledge about world issues such as environmental justice and climate change. About my transition to veganism, I'm 17 years old, and I started going vegan when I was 15. So I was really young. I had no one to talk to about it. I knew no one who were vegan at the time, and so I really started my veganism journey, I guess, by myself and through the help of internet. So I guess right now I like inspiring other people, or like encouraging others, especially teens, to start their own research about veganism and find out their own personal motivations about going vegan. But basically my turning point was when back in 2019, I guess, there was this Amazon wildfire, and it was really big, and that really caught my attention, and that really broke my heart because I am lover of nature. I feel a strong connection with Earth. And so I contacted Aidan Gallagher, which he is right now still a United Nations Environmental Goodwill Ambassador. And I started talking to him, and he he told me that it is my responsibility as a content creator to make content about the Earth, considering that I do care about the Earth. And he also told me about the importance of veganism. And yeah, from then on, I started my own research. I started making my own content about veganism. I started experimenting new ways. And, speaking in events like this is truly a great way to connect with other vegans and, learn new things. So I'm really excited for today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, yeah, that's a great story. So maybe we can just start with the first question now. So to everyone, what are some benefits you've noticed since adopting this lifestyle?
I'll go first again. Sorry, just lost the mute button for a bit. I think for me, the first thing was the connection and empathy. And I kind of grew up in a very spiritual background. So for me to kind of feel that on another level was really intense. And I felt like a deeper sense of, just general empathy for not just the animals, but other people as well. And then for health reasons, I felt just a lot lighter and better. And I'm actually lactose intolerant. So to stop consuming dairy was a very big change for me. I felt very much better. And then also found that after going vegan for a while, you don't really crave, like people always ask, don't you crave meat? Don't you have cheat days? But I don't really find myself craving like meat from animals anymore. If it's protein, I usually like look for protein smoothies or like soy protein from other soy products. So that was also really interesting to kind of go away from that craving. And overall, just it feels better not to be consuming meat and dairy and eggs.
Okay, maybe I can go next. I guess I can say that I'm a very self-conscious person, especially about things that impact my academic progress, since that's what I do for a living. I make content about study tips and self-improvement. And I think that at first I really started noticing a noticeable increase in productivity, confidence, well-being, and so many other things, including empathy. I really agree on. And I also talked about it in depth about like the effects of veganism in my book. But I think the greatest effect that I've gotten ever since I became vegan is this change maker mindset. I guess I can call it. I don't know how to call it, but it's where I have this belief that what I say and what I do affects everyone around me. I mean, affects the people around me, and what I consume affects the environment and animals on this earth. And so that kind of thinking made me like really think about, oh, is this decision gonna make me a selfish person, things like that. Also, it made me like gain so much more self-control and discipline, because like things happen when people start like trying to convince me to try this non-vegan food, or like it's okay, you can try this, no one's gonna know, or like things like that happen a lot. And that's when like I am challenged to really stand on what I believe on, and that kind of mindset extends to everything I do in life. So that's pretty great, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't about like this. Like I think sometimes there's misconceptions about this purity, but it was more about like for all of us collectively, more about like unlearning and learning these new systems that really value the justice of life itself, that include both humans and non-human animals. And so I think for me, it allowed me to really actively rethink the ways of how I can be actively anti-racist and anti-speciesist, because I think that is something that I didn't really consider growing up with speciesism. But also the other thing is that decentralizing our global food systems. As we know, industrial agriculture or agribusiness is beyond the West in different types of countries. And so for me, looking into decentralizing being vegan, it allowed me to kind of reimagine locally of what it means to be a vegan that eats through local food systems, and like what does that look like for the food I eat. And so some of that is to also challenge myself of the produce that I can eat, because veganism to me is also about understanding how it's related to food justice, and also advocating for healthy cultural appropriate foods that are within the bioregion of that area. So thank you.
Okay, those are some really interesting answers. So let's just move on to the next question then. In recent years, animal agriculture and climate change have been linked together. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think for me, from what I've done in my research, I think that it's important to note that industrial agriculture was never meant to serve the people, but it was designed to rather capitalize and poison off people's bodies, because the ways that it's grown, the displacement of indigenous communities that happened here in the West, and the expansion of capital for this revolution of this mechanistic form of agriculture was never really sustainable in the long term. And so I think we're witnessing those effects now, is the amount of industrial agriculture been built and has destroyed a lot of soil has been a huge issue. And the ways that we've treated and slaughtered animals is very concerning, and workers that work there. So I think when it comes to crisis, it is a form, for me, I would say that agribusiness or industrial agriculture is stemmed from environmental colonialism, because we never really had these heavy globalized mechanistic food industries. And now that we do, it almost seems as if this is the only solution for our way to live. And I think it's unsustainable, like you said, because this is what is generating through emissions, through the poisoned water that's entering communities from animal waste. The treatment of everything is just unethical. And so that is really something that for me I've kind of understood throughout this process.
I guess I'll go next. Yeah, for me, because I guess I came in more from like I feel bad for the animals perspective. I didn't go so much into the climate side of it until way later, and then I probably have the same thought as everyone, thinking, what can my choices being vegan actually do? How much does it affect? And I think we've had this, everyone telling us the main cause of global warming and climate change is manufacturing and transportation. And only now animal agriculture has kind of taken more of a spotlight, because if you think about it, we eat like 3 or sometimes more times a day. And no one really thinks about the impact of how much or where that food comes from. And I'm only recently coming into the understanding that it's not just the food itself, it's not just the meat, but like large percentage of the land that was for livestock is also used to grow food for that livestock. And I don't think people really think about that. And yeah, so it's not just like the fact that we're consuming so much, but it's also just the food that is being distributed to the meat industry that could be used to feed other people is kind of being stopped there, if that makes sense.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. How great of an impact does the vegan lifestyle and or diet have when it comes to climate change, in your opinion?
Okay, I'll go first. So going back to what I was saying about the 3 meals a day, on like a global scale, 85% of soybeans we grow are crushed just to make feed for livestock. And being vegan, you need a lot of these soy proteins. That soy could instead be used to feed other people
people?
Percentage is about like 14 to 18% greenhouse gas emissions actually goes towards it comes from the production of, and you think that this your one decision kind of doesn't do a lot, but it's I always go back to this mindset of like, if you and 1 million other people are thinking you're not going to make a change, that's 1 million people thinking they're not making a change. But if say 1 million people are thinking, you know, I'm going to go vegan and this is going to drastically reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, this is going to drastically reduce my carbon footprint, that's 1 million people reducing their carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's not always like necessarily about your one action, it's about the community effort.
Yeah, I think that like, I think according from D3, if you don't eat meat, you don't consume in it. It reduces your carbon like footprint, or I say handprint because it's more personalized to who you are, reduces it by 73% of carbon dioxide emissions. And so I think that there is a large impact in individual change. And I think that with collective change and local change, as mentioned before, like that is what we want people to do, is because those conversations about veganism, meat intake, usually start with their family members. And those are probably one of the most hardest, but also easiest conversations to have, because you're more comfortable with your sibling, you're more comfortable with your parents, like you can have these rough discussions. And so I think that when that leads to your family, also leads to your friends. And I actually, when I first moved in to my first place after graduating college, I was that annoying vegan where I told my housemates, like, do you want something that's vegan? And at the end of the year when we moved out, one of my roommates turned vegan. And so I would have never thought that he would be vegan, but that's the kind of power influence to have these active conversations, is that it's not about exhausting yourself, but just reminding people about animal rights, human rights, environmental benefits, like how we can be better stewards of the earth, and also actively participate in just doing our own individual change. Because I think a lot of us stress ourselves out thinking we can't do anything, and so then that leads to inaction, or that leads to people not feeling well about themselves or shaming themselves not being enough. And so it's just about actively working to reduce as much as possible that is feasible to you or to your abilities currently.
Okay, that's a great answer. So moving on to the next question. Consuming animal products from mammals is definitely a problem due to the farming process. However, why is the consumption of fish an issue? Achintya, maybe you'd like to go first?
Yeah, so first of all, the way we gather fish is very destructive to their ecosystems. A lot of like, you know, natural wildlife fish farming use these massive nets that kind of catch a lot more fish than is actually consumed. I think there's actually a very, very small percentage that is usable for the market. And then they also catch a lot of other endangered species, other marine life like turtles. And this also kind of, you know, the fish that gets caught in this are sometimes fish that are not ready to, that are not mature yet. And so life as well for them to reproduce and have well, more fish available for us. And I think there's a statistic somewhere that shows that there's a potential that by 2050 or somewhere around there, we won't have any more fish in the ocean. Aside from that, the nets themselves can also be destructive to the corals when they kind of, you know, gather all the fish. And, you know, the activity of transporting the fish, the refrigeration of all the fish carcass is estimated to add about 179 million tons of greenhouse gas. And this is a statistic from like 2011. So it's Probably a lot more now. Yeah. Fish farming, which is, you know, kind of a solution now, but it also adds problems similarly in the same way that land agriculture adds problems in the way that it, you know, adds pesticides. It can be toxic to the natural ocean environment because all this massive fish in one area. And yeah, those are just a few problems to list a few.
Yeah, I think that when looking to the fishing, like extractive industry, like what they use in the market, very interesting. So they use this like mathematical formula or talk about optimal sustainable yield. And so OSY in the fishing industry represents the amount of fish that can sustainably, quote unquote, be caught in a certain area. And so it's very problematic to use those types of methods because sometimes the data that they've been using has been outdated from either the 90s or early 2000s, and fish populations are massively collapsing in different types of already most of the seas now have been very depleted. And so the process is very also cruel where bycatch happens where they are, you know, catching their certain fish that they need, but then those different types of marine species are caught within those nets, so they either get choked or they either die, and so it disrupts a lot of their migration patterns. And so that is one of the issues. And so beyond when you go above the ships, the other issues, the human rights issue, is that there is child slavery happening where children are being imported from different types of countries to work in these fisheries, and so they're having to then have to like navigate those spaces and also avoid they're being underpaid and being exploited. And within the land, when those fishes are sometimes transported or sometimes given to different types of markets and countries, when it comes to aqua farms or fishes being imported, what they do is that they inject the fish with these dirty water, basically to increase the volume of the fish to get a bigger value for that fish. But the issue is also the fact that generally women are being forced to work in those industries. And so it's also a human rights issue. And so this whole looking at this industrial sea industry is actually very cruel. And there is, you know, so there's a lot of high amounts of mercury, and I believe in shrimp and different types of fishes today. And so that is really another issue, that what we're really partaking in is not really that sustainable, or if we really know where it's coming from. So that is one thing that, yeah, I just wanted to add on there.
Okay, those are some great answers. So moving on to the next question. How did people to listen about this? And since a large number of people are quick to dismiss it.
Can I go first? Sorry, my mom was calling me in the other room. So about this, I think that I can share about something that I think most teens can relate on, which is about how to like communicate with the people around us first, like our family members about it. Because as a teen, you know, it's very hard to convince other people, especially people with like a traditional mindset, I guess, or people who don't know about veganism yet about it. And what I've learned is that we can always find out about what their standing is about plant-based food. So, for example, my mom and dad, I mean, at first they didn't really care about veganism, but I do know that they care about health. And so I found out more and more about the correlation between health benefits and veganism. And at first, I talked about going plant-based from a health perspective, I guess, from the health aspect of it to my parents, and that made them. I mean, that didn't make them dismiss veganism. And so after the discussion had been started, I started talking to them about these other reasons of why I want to go vegan, which is about the environmental impacts of it. And after that, my mom, she was convinced to buy me foods that are plant-based. And then my dad, he was convinced to start a hydroponic gardens so that we can eat from our own veggies, which is really fun. My family and I started talking more about environmental issues. And then my grandparents, they are, I'm 50 years old, I think. And my grandma, specifically, she really cares about traditional foods and local cultures. And so at first, I started talking to her about that while correlating it with plant-based food. And so after that, she started helping me getting to know about our own local culture and all the traditional foods that we have here in Lampung, which is a small city in Indonesia. And then she started teaching me about how to make my own vegan food from the recipes that we already know. So I think that's quite interesting that we can reach other people from a certain perspective as long as we know them enough. But I think that for other, I mean, no, if we're talking about veganism with people who we don't know personally, there are so many ways, I think, for us to start or to initiate discussions about veganism. There is a more aggressive way, I think, which is how Aidan Gallagher convinced me. He was way more aggressive about it. He was like, you said you care about the environment, but look at your content right now. Are you speaking about it? Like, are you advocating for it? That really that really affected my self-esteem, and that made me feel like a terrible person, after I found out about how my food consumption was really damaging the environment. I was devastated, but that became my turning point. But for me specifically, I mean, personally, I don't want to use that kind of method when I talk about veganism with others. I want to start discussions, I guess. Yeah, initiate discussions and understand people's perspectives, things like that.
That's a great answer. Would any of you guys like to go next?
Sorry, what was the question? I tried to hear, but I think it lagged.
Sorry, the question is, how can we get more people to be more open-minded regarding this issue of veganism, since a large number of people are quick to dismiss it?
I think there's some people who aren't for cancel culture. I kind of support cancel culture when it comes to problematic racists or people who have harmed, but I'm not for shame culture, because I think that with shame culture, especially with the animal rights community and veganism community, and some of it is that it's generally sometimes often felt in shame, or like, how dare you, or like, you're not a good person if you do this, you're not doing the right thing. But I think that for me in my community, I've always told people straight up that people in my life still eat non-human animals. My partner is vegetarian. um, and so I think that I'm more about improving one's educational experience about the issue instead of making them feel shamed. I know for me, it made me go vegan, like, to be shamed. That really was the case for me. But I've noticed that with younger generations, a lot of them are shifting their mindset to adopt this intersectional veganism framework, where it's not really rooted in shaming the person, being like, you're a horrible person, but rather being like, how do we educate you in a way that allows you to understand, or to give you those resources to build upon that? Because at the end of the day, shame culture doesn't really get a lot of people far. And in my view, if you're really wanting to become a better advocate in veganism, you have to meet people where they're at. And for me, I ate non-human animals for 21 years of my life. And it took me that long in my life, and some people go younger, which is really great. But I think, how do we make sure that even those that are older than me can go vegan or transition to go veganism without feeling unsafe in these spaces? And I've noticed this because there's already sometimes a lack of diversity when it comes to these types of conversations when I brought it up in animal rights sectors. And so I think that our advocacy, yes, looks different, but I'm not here to kind of promote a shame culture base, but rather to kind of educate and being like, this is a reality. These are two industries that we should talk about and look into. So yeah.
Yeah, just to continue, you guys. I think they're both right in the sense of, start with the people around you first, start with your family, and also to meet people where they're at. I'm a huge, my sister, my first advice, I guess, would be to, the question was, how can we get more people to listen? Start by listening to them. And because I think there's this idea that vegans won't listen. For me, it was more about animal welfare. For my sister, it was very much towards her health. And for others, it might be more because of the climate. Can everyone hear me? I'm getting messages about a lag.
We can hear you, just
We
slow.
can hear you, but there's a little bit of a lag.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yeah,
let's
just
do
presenting.
interesting answers by the way.
Yeah,
So we could do the next interests by the way. Interesting way. Let's just move on. Those were some interesting answers. And let's do to them interesting. Let's move to them interesting answers. Let's do some interesting answers. So we do them interests by okay. Interesting by the way. Okay, you respond to the next question. Interesting answer. What is the get to the next interest by so the interest by you good music interest by some interest the question
myself now. From an animal welfare perspective, sorry, there's a lot of talkback. I can't really hear what I'm saying. Okay, I'll just keep speaking if everyone can hear me. It's kind of like not a black and white answer for me, because the problem is not necessarily the meat itself, unless you're like me into the animal welfare side of it. It's the system that it's produced in. So basically, speaking about the system, we kind of struggle with this overconsumption and the lack of proper distribution. And that I don't think will be solved in a meat-free world, because yeah, the consumption itself and its patterns and its effects is the issue here. I actually just read today a fact that said the richest 20% of the population consume 45% of all the meat and fish, and the poorest 20% only consume 5%. And so that wouldn't be solved if we were in a meat-free world. It would be solved if we were like properly distributing the food. And so perhaps if there was a slow change that incorporated the change of the systems of consumption, it would work. Like, maybe we can hear from the others these things.
Okay, sorry that the audio was lagging, and so I couldn't hear what the moderator was trying to say, but I hope my voice is clear. Can anyone confirm that? Can you hear me? Okay. I think, okay, what is my opinion on a meat-free world? Would that be achievable? I think from an idealistic view, then I would say yes, it is achievable, because in the last 10 years, we've seen significant improvements already. And I think that the future prospects is not too bad. I've seen interviews in which people who are active in the environmental justice field were saying about their confidence about this meat-free world. For example, the CEO of Impossible Foods, which is Patrick Brown, said that it is totally doable for a society to be living, I mean, for our society to be living in a meat-free world by 2035, for example. But at the same time, I agree that it's not like black and white. At the same time, there's data that says emissions for agriculture is projected to increase 80% by 2050. So the possibilities are endless. And would that be a good solution? Would a meat-free world be a good solution? I think that yes, definitely it is, but it's not the only solution. I think everyone has their main preferred way to lessen their own carbon footprint. So I think that if everyone focuses on their own preferred way to lessen their carbon footprint and advocates on that, I think changes will be made. It sounds cheesy, but I do believe that every small action creates an impact, and it causes bigger actions to come. So
Can everyone hear me? Awesome.
yes.
Thank you. I think that here in the society that how we're used to these systems that we are in this consumerist society, I think there are a lot of challenges because industrial agriculture has so much political power and they get so much bailouts and subsidies by the governments. And so that's one of the huge issues. The other issue is that, people that don't live in this consumer society or indigenous communities who have to partake in the consumption of non-human animals. Um, when it comes to indigenous communities, I don't really have anything to say. That's not my community. I am not indigenous. I cannot speak for that indigenous community. But I think that in a meat-free world, um, I'm also very critical of green businesses monopolizing ecosystems for their development, because at the same time, it's really great. We should have these industries exist, not saying that they shouldn't. They should be accessible, affordable for people. My main concern is that, are we just replacing industrial ag with green industrial ag? And so does that really encompass what food sovereignty looks like for communities? Is that really what certain communities want in their cities or their environments? And so I think it's really important that we kind of also include this in our veganism, is that, do people want green products, or do they want healthy fruits and vegetables that is grown by the community, that is owned by the community land? And so that is something that I've been recognizing, that it is good to applaud these industries, but also understand too, they have the same growth mindset of increasing GDP for their business, expanding beyond the West. And so what does that look like for other communities that may be actively displaced, or slash, what does that look like? But at the same time, they, not to say they shouldn't exist, because industrial ag is already expanding more. And so that is very important thing.
Okay, those are some great answers. Maybe we can just move on to the question answer session now. So one common theme that I've been seeing regarding the questions is people asking, how can they convince their parents to let them follow veganism, since they have a lot of misconceptions regarding the health and the health of vegans, and that there's a lack of nutrients in the vegan diet. Olivia, maybe you'd like to go first, since you said you had some experience with this with your parents previously.
Okay, about convincing our parents. Yes, I do get this question quite a lot. I feel like so many people experience this, which I completely understand. I understand your struggle. I understand the confusion. I've been through that, but you know what? All of the confusion, all of the struggle, it's gonna be worth it. Trust me. About convincing my parents. So I knew that in the beginning, I had to have, I guess this only works in my family, but I don't know about other family, but in my family, I have to really have a plan before I talk to my parents about something. Sometimes I even make like proposals for things that I want to do. Because veganism is such a big thing, such a big change. I had to make a whole list of like descriptions about why I want to go vegan, and then like the health concerns about it, and then like the misconceptions about. Oh, I think one important thing I can share about is how I could transition slowly with the support of my parents. So at first, let's talk about what we can do after we start our own research. So I think that I've noticed some people never had the curiosity to learn about foods that they consume every single day. Well, this is the right time to get curious. So first, for each type of food or beverage that I consume, I identify and list down which ones have good food production and food processing methods, and which ones have damaging food production and processing methods. So how do you know if something is good or not? Well, you're free to decide what your parameter is, but for me, what I value most is, if it's good for the environment, if it's good for the welfare of the animals, and for my health. And so after I make this list, I talk about it with my parents. I discuss it with my parents, and then me and my parents, we decide which foods are discussion. You really know what you're talking about. And when they ask you about why you want to go vegan, make sure that you are completely convinced already. Because and also I promised my parents that I said it like this. Mom, Dad, I know that for now you might be doubting me and you might be thinking this is just some kind of experiment, but I promise you I will prove to you that this is a commitment that I am serious about. So yes, at first I made that commitment, and then I proved it to my parents. So yeah, the transition was very slow, I think. At first, I really just ate vegetables that were available on our table, and sometimes I only I only eat tempeh or tofu. But after that, my parents started feeling concerned about my health because I wasn't eating healthy foods, and so they started buying me more healthy foods, and started cooking vegan food. I think that you really have to know how your family works and how you can best convince your own parents, because the only person who knows how to do that is you. Basically, just observe how your parents what your parents mindset is about veganism, and then gather all of your data, and then list out all the food that you want to keep consuming and the food that you don't want to keep consuming, and just be patient. And just be patient in the process. It's not easy, but you can do it.
That's a great answer. Would any of the speakers like to go next?
Yeah, I think what Olive said was very right. You really have to know your own family, and each family kind of has their own, methods to convince each other. And the main thing about this question is that the reason your parents are allowing or not allowing you is because they care, and they have these kind of preconceived notions about what is healthy and what is not. So similar to, the tactic of how do we get other people to listen? How do you get your parents to listen? You meet them where they're at, meet them at where their concerns lie for you, and present them, with the figures of why you care so much about this and why you feel like you want to go vegan, and why they should be in support of your choices. So yeah, I mean, Olive pretty much said it all. I'm just adding on to that.
Isaiah, do you maybe have anything to add to that, or?
Oh no, I'm good. Everyone just said so much amazing things. It's such great tips, honestly.
Okay. So moving on to the next question. It's, if everyone in this world is willing to adopt the simple but powerful practice of the animal-free diet, will we be able to reverse the effects of global warming immediately?
I think that's a bit hard because I think that the issue is a lot of corporations and institutions that have created and contributed to the ecological collapse. And so I think that trying to get everyone into an animal free diet, or I would say lifestyle, to really value animal sentient beings, is to educate while also extending yourself to look into these institutions and corporations, as mentioned, that are responsible for this ecological crisis. Because as we know, the ones on top have the most political power, and so how do we decentralize that? I think is also important, is that maybe when we're advocating for veganism, we also make people understand the industrial agricultural laws in those countries. Because how do you divest? Like right now, my taxes go to the dairy industry in the United States, and I can't do anything about it. Like I can't opt out of taxes, or else the IRS here will come for me. But I think it's so important to note that we have policies and practices that are being implemented in a lot of actions to get away from this cruel industry. And I know in Canada recently, they were trying to vote against prison animal industrial farm, because they're trying to make inmates work in these industrial ag farms. And so really advocating for injustices in this world is really important. So I think that is something that I feel like isn't really possible yet, but I think actively we can do it while looking at the systems.
I'll just continue off of that. I agree with the whole like educational aspect of that, like educating the greater mass, because you're right, what needs to be done is like policy changes and changes in the systems from the higher ups. But something that really, really stuck to me recently, I saw like Greta's interview on MSNBC recently, and she was saying something about, I think she was asked like, if you could tell Joe Biden to do one thing and change one thing, what would you do? And she said, "Oh, I wouldn't say anything, because that would go against democracy, and democracy is all we have." And I really, really liked that, because I think if we really, genuinely, a lot of people care, and if we really present those figures and present just how dire the situation is, people will naturally want the systems to change. People will ask for the policy changes. And with this mass kind of contribution, things will change. So, yeah.
Olivia, would you like to add anything? Or
No, I think they already summed it up.
okay, that's great. So now for the final question. Sorry to keep this short and because of the technical difficulties too. But there's a question that since becoming vegan means we are dependent on agriculture, how do we know the food we consume does not come from agriculture where they burn or did deforestation to build industries? I'm gonna put it in the chat box, like repost it.
I think I think it depends on your country, because I grew up in Los Angeles, California, my whole life, and so we're a very agricultural state in this, I think, Central Valley area, and so I think for me, it's like you said. I think with veganism, that's one of the issues, is that how do we know that the produce we are getting is actually from a just, equitable society? And I think really example of this recently was about, I think, coconut milk. And in Thailand, they were using monkeys to get the coconuts, and then they would beat them. And so there's a lot of issues with our food systems, and this is what I think that should be looked into. Is that yes, veganism is divesting as much as possible, but I think that what's missing is also our localized food systems, because if we're not able to know where our food comes from, and also season, like I'll give a great example that when I go to my supermarket, I see dragon fruit every week now. I never saw dragon fruit growing up in Los Angeles. I never saw it in my markets, and now to see that it's very globalized, this produce everywhere, makes me wonder, like, it's not really sustainable to continue having this. And so when it comes to avocados too, like water rights and all of these other issues in Mexico, I think, how to make sure that you're doing the best as possible as you buy locally, but also understand when you're trying to present veganism is that, yes, we know these systems aren't perfect, but we can actively make an effort to understand it. Because I think what happens is that when you say you go vegan, you're like, okay, I'm done. I did my job. I did my part, but you're still contributing to these systems, which we all do, and that's no shame on you. But I think it's important that we don't really ignore that side and be also critical in our veganism. Of like, how do we extend ourselves to food sovereignty and decentralizing these global food systems that are just capitalizing and poisoning off ecosystems, people's bodies, and animal bodies in different ways that may not see as slaughter, but is in different ways of oppression.
Okay, that's a really interesting answer and a really good perspective to put it. Olivia and Achintya, do you guys have anything to add, maybe?
Yeah, that was very perfectly answered, actually. Thank you so much. But yeah, just to stress the consuming locally, because going into the whole vegan diet, you're with this kind of sustainable lifestyle now, but then to, as you were saying, consume avocados flown in from a completely different area is not really, in line with that sustainable lifestyle you're trying to live. And I mean, I'm from Indonesia, and for all the Indonesian viewers here, we're so almost privileged to be living in a place that has such an abundance of naturally sourced foods, and you can just go down to like the warung down the street, and like 80% of the food choices there are locally sourced vegetables. And yeah, just to stress that whole, like, you know, consume locally as much as you can. I think answers the question, just to add on what was already so beautifully answered.
I think that for me, when it comes to buying products like in supermarkets and things like that, I got this tip from Kak Vero, which was a communication officer in WWF, and she said to me that it's really important to look at the eco labels when you buy products. And also for my daily consumption, my family buys food from our local markets. So yes, I agree with the points that Isaiah and Achintia made, because like it's much more. I think that it is. Wait, what was I gonna say? Oh, because like if we buy foods from other countries, obviously there will be emissions from the transportation process compared to if we buy foods locally. So yes, I do think that's really important.
Okay, those were some really great answers from everyone. So that's the end of the session. Thank you so much to our speakers. It was great having this insightful discussion with you all, and we greatly appreciate it here at Green Welfare. I got to learn a lot myself today too. To the members of the audience, it is now the end of session 1, so please don't forget to fill out the attendance form to be eligible for the e-certificate. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much to the speakers. We really love this.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
And with that, I'll be handing the floor over to our other moderator, Hanum.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Fiza. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm your this session moderator. My name is Hanum. I'm part of the PR team of Green Welfare. So in this session, wait for a minute. Okay. In this session, we're going to talk about the politics of climate change. Before that, a disclaimer, this is the only session that will be conducted in Bahasa Indonesia. So, what's about the politics and climate change? As the climate crisis becomes more serious and obvious, we are facing a frightening picture of the coming environmental apocalypse. This is not a one-man's job. This way of perception is an approach to study the issues surrounding the decision-making of climate change. In session 2, we learn about the politics. Sorry, in this session, we're going to talk about politics of climate change and why it's important for us to dive in deeper in this matter. So for today's speakers, we're going to invite and he is also graduated from Institut Teknologi Bandung in environmental engineering. I personally find this interesting. Me as an IR student, probably going to take this as my thesis. Enough for the tangent. Without further ado, I invite Taputu Indi Ferdian to give his presentation.
Halo. Saya udah kelihatan. saya kalau
Um, Suara kakak jauh gitu, tapi udah kelihatan Kak. For the convenience, please all attendees to move from YouTube. I'm really sorry for the inconvenience. See you all. Right now we're going to wait Kak Putu for a bit, so please stay. So please bear with us. I'm really sorry for that.
presentasinya dalam bahasa Indonesia karena saya cukup menghindari lost in translation ya. Cuma untuk mengakomodasi mungkin ada pendengar dari luar, saya coba untuk membuat paparnya dalam bahasa Inggris gitu. Tapi nanti bahasa pengantarnya pakai bahasa Indonesia. Sorry. Oke. Bisa kita mulai ya. Pertama, perkenalkan bahwa saya adalah Putu Nigarian. Saya energy emission analyst dari background saya adalah lulusan teknik mesin ITB. Saya terus di tahun 2016, mungkin berarti sudah sekitar 5 tahun bekerja kali ya, dan bidang saya dari dulu spesifiknya di bagian energi. Cuma sekitar beberapa tahun belakangan saya fokusnya berada di sustainable energy ataupun di climate change gitu. Nah, langsung kita mulai. Tentang pertama, apakah sebenarnya yang kita hadapi sekarang itu climate change atau climate crisis? Nah, pertanyaan ini sebenarnya sudah mulai ditanyakan oleh banyak pihak gitu ya, apakah malah kita menghadapi isu ini. Saya menunjukkan satu diagram yang dibuat oleh Bapak Nordhaus gitu di tahun 1975, tapi menurut saya masih sangat relevan, dan diagram dari Nordhaus banyak. Nah, diagram ini menunjukkan bahwa sebuah emisi gitu ya, sebuah emisi dihasilkan dan dia melalui beberapa proses hingga menjadi sebuah siklus lagi gitu. Nah, dan kita melihat bahwa dari diagram ini emisi tersebut mempunyai beberapa dampak yang tidak hanya kepada lingkungan ataupun bumi begitu, tapi yang kita rasakan sekarang adalah yang ultimate effects-nya yang di bagian keempat, ya, bahwa temperatur, kemudian kenaikan curah hujan dan peningkatan tinggi permukaan air laut gitu ya, itu kan menurut saya bukan hanya, tapi dampak-dampak yang sebenarnya intermittent atau dampak-dampak perantara gitu, yang dia dampaknya kepada itu. Nah, dampak-dampak kepada manusianya itulah yang menjadikan perubahan iklim ini mengerikan sekali gitu ya. Mengerikan dalam artian mempengaruhi hidup kita di banyak aspek. Seperti contohnya di sini ada pengaruh terhadap pertanian ataupun sektor agrikultur gitu, di mana kita sekarang melihat banyak sekali bencana alam akibat perubahan iklim yang menyebabkan kegagalan panen seperti itu. Kemudian ada juga perubahan-perubahan dari iklim kita yang membuat banyak sekali penyelesaian dalam hidup kita, seperti di bangunan gitu. Kita sekarang membutuhkan bangunan yang lebih bisa mengakomodasi kesejukan supaya kita nyaman gitu ya, dibandingkan dulu mungkin di tahun 60-an 70-an gitu AC tidak terlalu dibutuhkan, tapi sekarang AC seakan-akan menjadi barang yang penting gitu untuk manusia. Nah, oleh karena itu kembali pada pertanyaan, apakah kita sekarang menghadapi hanya perubahan iklim atau kita menghadapi krisis iklim seperti itu? Maka di sini saya menyampaikan bahwa kita berjuang untuk melawan perubahan krisis iklim itu bukan hanya berjuang untuk si bumi, tapi kita berjuang untuk hidup kita sendiri sebenarnya. Seperti ada quotes dari stand up komedian favorit saya gitu ya, George Carlin. George Carlin bilang, seberapapun tingginya temperatur permukaan bumi, seberapapun banjir terjadi, tsunami terjadi, hujan selebat apapun, bumi itu akan tetap menjadi bumi gitu. Tapi yang tidak baik-baik saja adalah manusianya seperti itu. Nah, lalu tadi adalah pengantar tentang krisis iklim. Lalu bagaimana keadaan kita sekarang gitu ya di tentang krisis iklim ini? Nah, ada berita baik gitu. Tingkat emisi dunia kita sekarang lagi turun, jadi jumlah CO2-nya lagi turun gitu ya. Tapi berita buruknya adalah itu hanya sesaat saja begitu. Karena kenapa bisa turun? Yang pertama adalah sekarang kita sedang menghadapi pandemi COVID-19 gitu. Nah, pandemi COVID-19 itu kan menyebabkan perekonomian kita melesu gitu ya. Kegiatan ekonominya mulai berhenti, sehingga emisi yang dihasilkan dari kegiatan ekonomi tersebut juga tidak setinggi emisi pada saat sebelum pandemi terjadi gitu. Namun berkaca dari pengalaman yang sudah-sudah, termasuk kalau nggak salah di krisis ekonomi global di tahun 2008 gitu, dunia setelah mengalami penurunan emisi akibat melesunya ekonomi tadi akan mengalami lonjakan emisi setelah ekonominya ikut membaik. Nah, ini yang kita sebut sebagai emission rebound gitu. Nah, emission rebound terjadi seiringan dengan terjadi peningkatan ataupun perbaikan ekonomi global juga. Nah, seperti kita lihat di sebelah kiri gitu, diagram sebelah kiri menceritakan tingkat emisi ya, yang warna kuning itu tingkat emisi dunia tahun semester 1 2020 sampai dengan mungkin April tuh ya. April 2020 kita melihat bahwa emisi global tuh turun gitu, emisi hariannya. Nah, kenapa turun? Karena dari Januari sampai April itu kan banyak sekali kebijakan dari negara-negara yang melakukan lockdown gitu. Nah, lockdown menghambat ekonomi, emisinya turun. Nah, setelah lockdown direlaksasi pasca April 2020, terlihat bahwa emisi itu naik lagi seiring dengan membaiknya ekonomi masyarakat. Seperti itu. Nah, yang perlu kita sadari di sini bahwa yang namanya resesi ekonomi gitu ya, turunnya ekonomi akibat pandemi itu yang kemudian dicoba di recover oleh pemerintah melalui kebijakan-kebijakan untuk memulihkan ekonomi begitu ya, itu tidak lebih penting daripada bahaya-bahaya yang mengancam kita sebenarnya, yaitu bahaya climate change, dan yang lebih parah lagi ada biodiversity collapse gitu. Biodiversity collapse di sini artinya adalah kepunahan makhluk hidup gitu ya. Jadi dengan adanya climate change seperti yang saya ceritakan di slide sebelumnya tadi akan mengubah ataupun mempengaruhi kehidupan makhluk hidup yang ada di bumi ini gitu. Nah, sehingga seharusnya dalam pemulihan ekonomi kita gitu, kita nggak boleh hanya berfokus pada pertumbuhan ekonomi, tapi kita juga harus memikirkan dampak-dampak yang lebih besar daripada itu. Nah, lalu setelah kita mengetahui bahwa kita harus memikirkan dampak-dampak iklim, gitu, perubahan iklim, lalu bagaimana kita harusnya mengatasi hal itu? Nah, sebenarnya di dunia sekarang kita sudah punya daftar panjang, ya, long list dari strategi-strategi kunci yang sudah mungkin dipikirkan oleh ilmuwan-ilmuwan di sana, gitu, ataupun orang-orang yang seperti Greta Thunberg yang sudah mempromosikan bagaimana kita harus melawan perubahan iklim, kita harus memakai teknologi yang lebih bersih, kita harus mengalihkan uang-uang kita untuk kegiatan-kegiatan yang ramah lingkungan, gitu, menaikkan kesadaran publik seperti tadi dibahas di sesi sebelumnya bahwa mungkin pendidikan juga penting gitu ya. Kemudian kita juga harus meninggalkan bahan bakar fosil yang nggak ramah lingkungan, dan banyak sekali apa yang bisa kita lakukan. Cuma dari sekian banyak itu nggak akan ada yang berarti begitu kalau kita nggak punya sesuatu yang namanya political will, gitu, kesadaran politik ataupun keputusan politik. Karena semuanya itu akan kembali lagi pada bagaimana daftar panjang tadi ataupun kegiatan-kegiatan tadi itu bisa diimplementasikan, gitu kan. Nah, itulah mengapa kebijakan politik gitu sangat penting, gitu, karena ada beberapa alasan. Yang pertama, kebijakan itu sendiri dalam bahasa ilmiahnya berperan sebagai enabling environment gitu. Dalam artian ketika tidak ada kebijakan, maka hal-hal yang kita rencanakan di tabel yang warna biru itu tidak akan terjadi, ataupun di cara pandang lainnya, ketika ada kebijakan, maka hal-hal di tabel warna biru itu akan bisa implementasinya akan bisa di-boost gitu, akan bisa didorong jadi lebih agresif atau lebih progresif. Seperti itu. Yang kedua, dengan adanya kebijakan ini akan memberikan kepastian kepada pelaku bisnis gitu. Karena tidak bisa kita pungkiri bahwa dunia ini kan berjalan dengan dengan prinsip bisnis gitu. Tidak terlepas juga hal-hal yang berhubungan dengan perubahan iklim ini, di mana banyak sekali kegiatan-kegiatan bisnis yang akhirnya berubah menjadi sustainable gitu, yang di dalam implementasinya ketika industri-industri ataupun pebisnis melakukan sustainable business ini, mereka juga butuh kepastian bahwa, oh, pemerintah mendukung kok kegiatan saya, pemerintah tidak akan kembali mendukung bisnis-bisnis yang tidak sustainable gitu, seperti mungkin ada, kalau teman-teman tahu ada lampu yang mungkin nggak hemat energi gitu kan, yang di satu sisi sekarang sudah mulai banyak orang-orang yang beralih ke lampu yang hemat energi. Ketika pemerintah tidak memberikan kepastian kepada pelaku bisnis yang berbisnis di bidang lampu hemat energi, maka tidak akan membuat bisnis yang mau pebisnis baru yang mau beralih ke sustainable business untuk bisa tertarik gitu di sustainable bisnisnya. Nah, lalu yang ketiga, dengan adanya kebijakan ini akan memberikan sebuah sikap gitu, menunjukkan sikap pemerintah yang dapat menjadi contoh kepada masyarakat maupun pihak-pihak global. Bahwa sebagai contoh, semisal Indonesia sudah punya NDC gitu ya, maka pemerintah Indonesia menunjukkan kalau kita berkomitmen gitu kepada penurunan emisi secara global, dan ini akan bisa dicontoh oleh masyarakatnya. Lalu sebenarnya apa yang menentukan keputusan politik tadi itu untuk diambil ya? Sebenarnya ada banyak faktor gitu. Tapi di sini saya akan mencoba mengambil 3 faktor yang menurut saya paling relevan. Yang paling relevan tentang bagaimana keputusan politik itu bisa diambil dan dipengaruhi. Yang pertama adalah dari keinginan publik gitu ya, dari public interest-nya. Maksudnya di sini apakah isu perubahan iklim itu sudah populer di Indonesia gitu. Apakah orang-orang itu sudah mulai sadar untuk hidup dengan lebih berkelanjutan, dengan lebih sustainable gitu, ingin mendapatkan atau mengonsumsi barang-barang yang sifatnya green setiap harinya. Nah, public interest ini bisa mendorong pemerintah untuk menghasilkan kebijakan yang lebih pro lingkungan. Dan yang kedua, dari sisi private sector sendiri, dengan adanya permintaan yang tinggi untuk barang-barang yang istilahnya itu green goods gitu. Ini memaksa industri kita untuk memproduksi barang-barang yang lebih ramah lingkungan tadi, yang tentunya diproduksi dengan proses yang lebih ramah lingkungan juga. Jadi tidak hanya dari produknya, tapi dari proses membuat produk sendiri itu juga ramah lingkungan. Nah, faktor yang kedua adalah bagaimana kita mempunyai teknologi dan dana untuk melaksanakan kegiatan ataupun program-program yang ramah lingkungan. Karena poinnya balik lagi bahwa sekarang tidak bisa dipungkiri kegiatan yang ramah lingkungan itu masih banyak yang istilahnya lebih mahal gitu daripada kegiatan-kegiatan biasa, seperti tanaman organik dibandingkan tanaman yang memakai pupuk yang non organik gitu kan. Harga makanan tanaman organik lebih mahal daripada yang tanaman non organik, dan itu menjadi contoh bahwa kalau kita tidak punya resource di sini, ada contohnya uang gitu ya, kita nggak bisa mengonsumsi makanan organik setiap hari gitu kan. Maka keberadaan teknologi dan dana ini diperlukan untuk kita bisa leluasa melakukan kegiatan-kegiatan atau program-program yang lebih berkelanjutan. Contohnya kayak yang baru-baru ini adalah di Uni Eropa gitu. Uni Eropa kenapa bisa berani untuk mendorong sustainable development gitu? Karena mereka punya dananya. Mereka untuk EU Green Deal-nya mereka mengalokasikan setidaknya berapa 500 miliar euro gitu untuk kegiatan-kegiatan sustainable development. Nah, Indonesia kan belum tentu punya uang sebanyak itu juga. Dan yang faktor ketiga adalah geopolitik global ya. Jadi sekarang tuh juga zamannya seperti yang saya sebutkan barusan, ada Uni Eropa Green Deal gitu yang dia mencoba untuk mengurangi emisi di lingkup negara-negara Eropa, di mana salah satunya mencoba untuk memban gitu, membatasi ataupun melarang impor produk-produk yang tidak ramah lingkungan. Yang kita sekarang rasakan adalah biodiesel kita yang dari kelapa sawit itu di polemik persaingan dengan tanaman lokal mereka begitu. Tapi ada poin benarnya bahwa biodiesel kita masih diragukan tentang sertifikasi sustainable-nya gitu. Nah, itu hal seperti itu yang membuat keputusan politik tentang apakah kita harus beralih kepada hal pembangunan yang lebih berkelanjutan atau tidak gitu, itu dibuat. Dan mungkin ada juga faktor-faktor dari negara-negara lain gitu yang seperti Cina dan EU tadi yang sudah mencanangkan net zero emission, yang artinya mereka tidak akan jadi produksi dan serapan emisi mereka itu netonya 0. Dibilang mereka tidak mengeluarkan emisi. Kalau Cina itu di tahun 2050 gitu cita-citanya. Nah, hal seperti ini kan juga di satu sisi memberikan kebanggaan ataupun mungkin rasa iri gitu ya dari Indonesia. Kok Cina sudah bisa berani gitu, kita kapan? Nah, hal seperti itu juga yang bisa menjadi mempengaruhi keputusan politik kita. Nah, lalu bagaimana dengan yang terjadi di Indonesia sekarang gitu? Nah, kalau kita melihat apa yang terjadi di Indonesia, ada beberapa isu yang saya tangkap. Yang pertama, isu lingkungan masih nggak populer ya untuk masyarakat. Saya terakhir melihat isu yang cukup luas dilakukan adalah isu dari CSIS pada pemilu 2019 yang menempatkan isu lingkungan sebagai isu paling bawah dari sekian banyak isu seperti hukum, ekonomi, kesejahteraan, kemiskinan, dan di antara semua itu lingkungan merupakan isu yang berada di benar-benar paling bawah dari masyarakat gitu. Nah, kemudian yang kedua, porsi pendanaan untuk program-program hijau kita dalam APBN itu masih kecil juga. Secara historis tidak pernah lebih dari 5% budget APBN kita itu dialokasikan untuk program-program hijau. Lalu yang paling baru dalam rencana pemulihan ekonomi pasca untuk pandemi COVID ini bahkan kurang dari 1%-nya gitu dialokasikan untuk Green Recovery Plan. Padahal ketika kita melihat ataupun membenchmark kepada Uni Eropa maupun Amerika Serikat gitu, mereka benar-benar menjadikan sustainable development ini ataupun green recovery sebagai sentralnya, sebagai sentral recovery ekonomi mereka. Seperti Amerika itu menumbuhkan pekerjaan-pekerjaan atau menciptakan lapangan kerja baru untuk orang-orang yang terkena PHK waktu COVID gitu ya, menciptakan kerjaan baru di bidang misalnya renewable energy gitu. Itu kan hal-hal yang sebenarnya itu harus dilakukan untuk menghindari emission rebound tadi. Nah, hal yang ketiga, balik lagi pada kapasitas industri kita, industri lokal kita yang tidak bisa memproduce sustainable goods atau memenuhi demand untuk sustainable goods ini gitu. Contohnya untuk peralatan di energi terbarukan ya. Kalau nggak salah itu di sektor energi terbarukan di pembangkit listrik ada peraturan tentang TKDN gitu. Minimal berapa persen harus dipenuhi dari barang-barang lokal gitu ya. Nah, tetapi dengan kondisi kita sekarang, contoh di pembangunan pembangkit listrik tenaga surya, kita belum bisa memproduksi panel suryanya sendiri gitu. Kita masih impor, kita saat ini masih masih hanya bisa merakit gitu. Nah, otomatis kan peraturan-peraturan seperti ini yang ya dalam tanda kutip menghambat gitu perkembangan atau pengembangan EBT di Indonesia. Nah, berangkat dari isu-isu tersebut, bagaimana Indonesia harus merespon hal ini dengan kompleksitas tadi. Nah, sebelum kita berangkat ataupun masuk tentang respon Indonesia, ada baiknya kita membahas dulu gitu. Bagaimana harusnya pendekatan Indonesia dalam merespon hal-hal tadi. Nah, kita perlu mencatat bahwa yang pertama ada 2 poin ya. Yang pertama itu masalah krisis climate ini sektor atau lintas sektor yang kita nggak bisa hanya membahas sektor aspek lingkungan saja di dalam krisis iklim, tapi kita juga berbicara tentang ekonomi dan aspek sosialnya. Nah, untuk itu kita memerlukan pendekatan yang balance, yang seimbang itu antara aspek-aspek tersebut. Contohnya, ketika kita melihat maraknya isu-isu penutupan PLTU. Kalau yang kemarin Seksi Killers ya, filmnya Dani Laksono gitu kan, memframe bahwa PLTU itu memang harus segera ditutup gitu. Nah, tapi perlu kita lihat secara lebih komprehensif bahwa penutupan PLTU yang tiba-tiba gitu akan menaikkan angka pengangguran bagi pekerja-pekerja di sektor industri ekstraktif, terutama batu bara dan di industri pembangkit batu baranya sendiri gitu, yang pada akhirnya akan meningkatkan tingkat kemiskinan. Yang kita tahu bahwa orang-orang di industri ekstraktif itu kebanyakan berasal dari ekonomi bawah gitu. Nah, ketika mungkin kita yang berada saya bilang kita yang hadir di sini maksudnya adalah kelas menengah gitu. Kita mendorong untuk penutupan PLTU, lalu kita kayak seakan-akan nyaman dan merasa berjasa bagi lingkungan, tapi kita tidak melihat bagaimana dampak dari penutupan ini kepada saudara-saudara kita yang mungkin hidupnya bergantung dari sana, seperti itu. Lalu yang kedua, dari UNFCCC sendiri, badan dari PBB yang mengatasi climate change, gitu ya, mengurusi climate change, itu menerapkan sebuah framework yang namanya Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. Nah, atau disebut CBDR. CBDR ini intinya bercerita bahwa dalam masalah penanganan perubahan iklim gitu, semua negara di dunia itu merasakan dampak yang sama, common gitu. Tapi untuk mengatasinya kita memiliki peran yang berbeda-beda gitu. Dalam artian kalau kita membandingkan target global, kita harus menurunkan emisi di bawah Kita harus menurunkan temperatur di bawah 2 derajat atau kalau bisa 1,5 derajat gitu. Nah, untuk mencapai ke sana, tanggung jawab negara-negara besar seperti Amerika, seperti Inggris yang mereka sudah mengeluarkan emisi lebih banyak di zaman dulu dari zaman revolusi industri begitu, emisinya gila-gilaan, terus sekarang masa mau diturunkan dengan Indonesia yang ada beberapa pembagian peran gitu. Kalau mau cari tahu mungkin ada negara-negara yang namanya Annex 1, kemudian ada negara-negara non-annex dalam UNFCCC gitu. Di mana negara-negara yang sudah maju atau developed countries ini wajib untuk membantu negara-negara yang masih berkembang seperti Indonesia untuk mengatasi perubahan iklim. Maka ketika kita membuat sebuah kebijakan perubahan iklim, diwajarkan ketika Indonesia tidak bisa berlaku ataupun melakukan hal-hal yang progresif seperti di Uni Eropa tadi, seperti di mungkin China beda kasus ya, di Amerika begitu, yang mereka sudah bisa dengan PD-nya bilang, ayo kita jadikan climate change sebagai fokus utama gitu. Nah, memang Indonesia juga harus menjadikan climate change sebagai fokus utama, tapi kita juga masih punya banyak PR-PR lainnya, PR-PR domestik yang harus diselesaikan. Maka penggunaan framework CBDR ini bagi Indonesia itu kalau istilah saya tidak hanya untuk menjamin adanya fast transition, transisi yang cepat, tapi juga just transition, yaitu transisi yang adil gitu, untuk menjadi lebih berkelanjutan. Nah, menimbang dua hal tersebut, maka Indonesia sebagai negara sendiri gitu, punya target-target. Kemudian Indonesia juga merupakan bagian dari global gitu, yang juga harus berkontribusi dalam dinamika politik global yang saya sebut di sini ada international agenda gitu. Nah, dua-duanya ini harus balance gitu. Kita nggak bisa memilih salah satu, kita nggak bisa condong ke salah satu. Dua-duanya itu memang harus balance, harus dipikirkan seperti itu. Nah, dari sinilah kemudian di sekitar tahun 2017 lalu, Bappenas menginisiasi sebuah konsep pembangunan gitu yang kita sebut sebagai Low Carbon Development Initiative Indonesia. Nah, atau kita sebut LCDI ya. LCDI ini sebenarnya adalah respon dari pemerintah Indonesia untuk bagaimana kita bisa mulai transisi ke Indonesia yang lebih berkelanjutan gitu. Jadi kalau dibilang Indonesia tidak memikirkan lingkungan sama sekali, ya enggak juga gitu. Buktinya LCDI ini, framework kebijakan ini sudah diadopsi di Indonesia, yaitu dalam dokumen RPJMN. Kalau teman-teman boleh tahu, sekuat apa dokumen RPJMN ini? Dokumen RPJMN itu merupakan basis ataupun dasar bagi semua kementerian dan lembaga di Indonesia untuk membuat target-target tahunan mereka gitu. Sampai jangkanya 5 tahun, sekarang sampai tahun 2024, dan yang terbaru LCDI ini akan diinsersi juga dalam rencana pembangunan sampai tahun 2045 gitu. Nah, di mana LCDI ini berfokus pada setidaknya 5 sektor yang strategis dari sisi ekonomi, sosial, dan lingkungan. Yaitu ada sektor energi, kemudian ada AVOLO itu agriculture, pertanian, forestry, kehutanan, dan land use, alih guna lahan. Kemudian ada sektor limbah, ada sektor industri, dan sektor blue carbon, yaitu sektor pesisir dan laut, pesisir dan kelautan. Nah, di dalam formulasi kebijakannya sendiri, LCDI ini mencoba untuk menggunakan yang namanya sistem pendekatan sistem gitu ya. Seperti contoh di gambar yang kanan ini, kita bisa melihat bahwa untuk memformulasikan kebijakan di sektor energi, kita harus memperhitungkan beberapa faktor lain gitu di luar energi, sehingga kita bisa melihat kebijakan energi apa yang bisa kita gunakan untuk menurunkan emisi kita di sektor energi, seperti itu. Nah, lalu ini tadi sudah saya sebutkan bahwa ada 5 sektor di LCDI ini. Lalu bagaimana LCDI ini bisa membantu Indonesia untuk bertransformasi ke ekonomi hijau gitu, yang sekarang lagi gencar-gencarnya disuarakan oleh negara-negara maju. Nah, ada beberapa strategi di sini, saya tampilkan 5 strategi yang bisa diadopsi ke semua sektor itu, semua sektor fokus LCDI, yaitu kita bisa menciptakan lapangan kerja hijau, kita bisa meningkatkan kualitas kesehatan masyarakat dengan mengurangi tingkat polusinya, kemudian kita bisa meningkatkan produktivitas masyarakat dengan proses-proses yang lebih tahan terhadap istilahnya di sini goncangan gitu ya. Seperti contoh kita menerapkan asuransi pertanian gitu, asuransi pertanian yang ketika ada gagal panen akibat bencana, maka akan ada asuransi untuk petaninya, sehingga mereka bisa menanam kembali ataupun tidak rugi-rugi amat gitu loh. Kemudian kita juga membutuhkan stimulus-stimulus fiskal yang hijau gitu ya ke sektor-sektor prioritas tadi. Dan yang terakhir, kita mendorong industri kita untuk bisa menerapkan bisnis yang lebih berkelanjutan seperti itu. Lalu terakhir, kira-kira apa sih benefitnya dari penerapan LCDI ini? Kami dalam studi LCDI, kalau teman-teman googling di Google gitu ya, LCDI Indonesia Report, maka bisa dilihat di situ ada studi kami tentang bagaimana dampak LCDI ini pada 3 aspek prioritas kami, yaitu aspek sosial, ekonomi, dan lingkungan tentunya. Di aspek sosial kita bisa meningkatkan tenaga kerja, kemudian kita bisa menurunkan tingkat kemiskinan, kemudian kita juga bisa mempromot kesetaraan gender gitu. Lalu di ekonominya sendiri kita bisa menumbuhkan green economy, kita bisa menerapkan investasi yang performanya lebih tinggi dalam artian output atau apa yang didapatkan oleh investor dalam investasinya di Indonesia itu lebih tinggi begitu daripada bisnis-bisnis konvensional sebelumnya. Kemudian yang terakhir adalah di sisi lingkungannya, kita bisa mengurangi pembalakan hutan, kemudian kita meningkatkan kualitas air, kualitas udara gitu ya. Dan yang pastinya yang terakhir kita bisa juga untuk mencapai target Paris Agreement di tahun 2030, yaitu penurunan emisi sebesar 29% dengan usaha sendiri. Nah, terakhir saya ingin menutup dengan kata-katanya Ban Ki-moon ya, mantan sekjennya PBB. Kita ini sebenarnya adalah generasi yang, maksudnya kita ini sebenarnya ini si generasi boomer dan generation X gitu. Mereka adalah generasi yang pertama kali bisa mengentaskan dunia itu dari kemiskinan itu dibuktikan dengan penurunan kemiskinan global. Dan sayangnya juga unfortunately kita adalah generasi terakhir yang harus bisa mencegah dampak-dampak yang lebih buruk dari perubahan iklim tadi. Nah, untuk itu kita juga seakan punya tanggung jawab moral gitu untuk menentukan apakah dunia ini akan tetap berjalan atau berakhir di tangan kita. Nah, sekian dari saya. Terima kasih. Untuk teman-teman yang mungkin penasaran bisa dilihat di kita punya Instagram, ada podcast juga, dan kemudian ada beberapa video di YouTube untuk Low Carbon Development Indonesia. Sekian presentasi dari saya. Terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih banyak, Kak Indi. That's really interesting presentation. Mungkin sebelum masuk ke Q&A, aku mau nanya kayak beberapa pertanyaan. Mungkin satu kepada kakak. Terutama kan baru-baru ini tuh ada isu mengenai Presiden Jokowi itu meng-ACC yang mengenai emisi batu bara itu, Kak. Terus kayak, ya kan, Kak? Nah, mungkin lebih kayak mau nanya, aduh, menurut kakak gimana sih pendapat kakak mengenai itu? Kayak itu kan udah jelas ya sebenarnya, kayak ya it's Indonesia tuh jadi kelihatannya kayak it's a capitalist country, etc. Itu yang dari sesi kemarin gitu, Kak. Menurut kakak kayak gimana?
Mungkin untuk khusus hal itu, pertama-tama saya bilang bahwa media itu mislead ya tentang isu ini, isu apa namanya limbah batu bara ini. Itu suara saya jelas nggak?
Jelas, Kak.
Kemarin saya juga cari-cari tentang si limbah ini, yaitu namanya kan sebenarnya spesifiknya limbahnya itu FABA gitu, fly ash and bottom ash, yaitu abu-abu dari batu bara yang dikeluarkan lewat cerobong ataupun yang ketinggalan pas dibakar di bawah gitu ya, di tanah gitu. Nah, kalau kita ngelihat dari benchmark negara lain pun di Amerika sendiri mendukung penggunaan si FABA ini. Bahkan 60% dari FABA yang dihasilkan oleh industri batubara di Amerika itu digunakan, dan itu dijamin dalam hukumnya mereka. Jadi secara secara bisnis wise itu menguntungkan, secara lingkungan itu tidak berbahaya, dan hal itu bahkan mendukung pembangunan berkelanjutan kali, karena kita nggak perlu membuang si FABA ini sembarangan, karena si FABA ini bisa dijadikan bahan untuk material bangunan kayak gitulah. Jadi ya respon saya untuk apakah membolehkan limbah batubara itu bijak, kalau respon saya ya, lihat dulu limbahnya apa gitu ya. Kalau untuk FABA ini masih bijak sih menurut saya.
Oke, siap, Kak. Mungkin sekarang bisa langsung masuk ke Q&A saja. Pertama-tama ada pertanyaan dari Bunga. Halo, aku Bunga. Apakah keputusan politik berkenaan enabling environment akan selalu efektif untuk masyarakat luas, walau dalam jangka panjang? Apakah itu bisa terjamin? Itu Kak.
Oke. Maksudnya enabling environment ini bukan mengadakan lingkungan ya, tapi lebih kepada penciptaan iklim untuk mengatasi climate crisis ini gitu. Jadi lingkungan ini bukan environment ini bukan lingkungan, tapi lebih ke iklim lah kayak gitu. Yang bukan iklim secara lingkungan ya. Kayak misalnya iklim bisnis dan sebagainya. Kalau dibilang efektif atau enggak, pasti efektif gitu. Karena semua yang akan kita lakukan itu harus berawal dari kepastian hukum dulu. Kayak semisal, contohnya apa ya yang enak ya? Semisal tentang faba tadi itu boleh. Nah, faba itu kan sebenarnya dari limbah batu bara yang dia itu bisa membantu kita untuk mengurangi konsumsi dari semen kan, kayak gitu, ataupun campuran-campuran bangunan lainnya yang tidak sustainable. Justru dengan adanya pemanfaatan faba ini kita bisa mengurangi konsumsi bahan tersebut dan akhirnya lebih sustainable karena tidak melakukan kegiatan ekstraksi di pertambangan misalnya gitu ya untuk mendapatkan semen. Nah, tapi sebelum ada peraturan dari presiden yang barusan itu, faba ini nggak bisa digunakan karena masih masuk ke limbah B3. Dengan adanya peraturan yang baru ini kan peraturan adalah manifestasi dari keputusan politik ya, kayak gitu. Dengan adanya peraturan yang baru ini, maka bisa mendorong penggunaan faba, kita bisa mengurangi kegiatan ekstraksi di hulunya gitu, dan pada akhirnya juga mendorong pembangunan yang berkelanjutan gitu, yang lebih berkelanjutan. Jadi efektif ya, dalam jangka panjang juga kayak gitu.
Oke, thank you Kak. Mungkin untuk pertanyaan selanjutnya, ini dari Raffi Alamin. Halo Kak, I'm Raffi Alamin from University of Parayangan. On the topic of policy, I would like to ask on the kind of to balance goal. Can you refer to these policies are PGM, low carbon initiative, and common but different approach?
Mohon dikoreksi tadi pertanyaannya bagaimana kita bisa mengimplementasikan balancing ini di level provinsi.
Iya, dilakukan oleh sebenarnya di kayak area yang provinsi gitu.
Kalau boleh cerita sendiri, di LCDI sendiri konsepnya setelah sekarang dimasukkan di tingkat nasional gitu, kita sekarang juga lagi meng-approach beberapa provinsi pilot gitu ya. Ada Jawa Barat, ada Jawa Tengah, kemudian ada Papua dan Papua Barat, ada Sulawesi Selatan, Bali, dan Riau gitu. Untuk menerapkan konsep LCDI ini di mereka. Gitu. Nah, penerapannya sendiri juga tetap dengan konsep CBDR tadi bahwa dengan skop nasionalnya kita punya Indonesia yang punya target penurunan emisi 29% di tahun 2030 dari beberapa sektor utama gitu kan, ada yang dari energi, ada yang dari lahan gitu, ada yang dari limbah dan sebagainya. Nah, dengan adanya provinsi-provinsi ini yang mengeluarkan emisi kan sifatnya unik. Belum tentu provinsi A itu sama emisi yang dikeluarkannya dengan provinsi B. Kita ambil contoh Jawa Barat dibandingkan dengan Riau gitu. Kalau di Jawa Barat kita bisa bilang bahwa emisi paling besar datangnya dari industri karena kita punya Karawang, kita punya Cikarang gitu ya, yang industrinya ngumpul di sana semua. Sehingga kalau kita mau mengadopsi CBDR, maka responsibility-nya Jawa Barat ya heavy di industrinya begitu. Namun ketika kita Riau yang di sana itu banyak sekali kebun-kebun sawit, maka yang menjadi concern kita adalah bagaimana kita bisa mengurangi emisi dari alih fungsi lahan yang sebelumnya hutan-hutan primer gitu ataupun hutan-hutan sekunder supaya tidak diubah menjadi sawit seperti itu. Maka responsibility-nya pemerintah Riau adalah mencegah adanya pembalakan ataupun pengalihgunaan lahan dari hutan ke kelapa sawit gitu. Kayak gitu sih.
Oke, berarti menurut kakak tiap provinsi itu pasti berbeda.
Potensinya sendirilah, singkatnya kayak gitu.
Oke, siap Kak. Mungkin untuk pertanyaan terakhir dari Damara. Sebenarnya Indonesia sanggup untuk memaksimalkan ambisi pada NDC kita. Apakah memang pemerintah kita tidak berdaya dan negara maju untuk lebih mengingat sumber daya negara maju lebih mumpuni untuk menyelesaikan masalah iklim secara efektif, gitu Kak?
Yes. Oke, pertanyaannya sangat intriguing gitu. Karena masa tidak berdaya, enggak juga sehingga menjadi negara maju. Karena memang begini, karena memang kalau coba nanti teman-teman search atau googling gitu ya, googling kenaikan tingkat emisi di global dari tahun 1700 atau 1600 sampai tahun 2019 terakhir gitu. Di situ kelihatan bahwa memang emisi yang dihasilkan dari negara-negara yang kita bilang maju itu kayak Inggris dan dimulai dari Inggris kemudian berlanjut ke Amerika itu memang sangat gila-gilaan dan mereka kalau kita bicara dalam konteks politik ya mereka dulu menggunakan misalnya energi fosil, mereka melakukan kegiatan-kegiatan yang nggak sustainable dan mendapatkan return ekonominya sekarang gitu sehingga mereka sekarang udah maju dan mereka bisa menerapkan kegiatan-kegiatan yang lebih sustainable di merekanya. Dan itu kan tidak bisa diberlakukan sama dengan Indonesia bahwa Indonesia belum melalui proses itu. Kalau dibilang Amerika 350 tahun loh bedanya sama Indonesia sejak mereka merdeka gitu. Prosesnya selama itu bedanya. Kalau kita menuntut Indonesia sama dengan Amerika maka itu akan nggak bijak. Cuma memang hal itu sebenarnya nggak bisa dijadikan alasan bahwa Indonesia akhirnya bermalas-malasan gitu ya, bermalas-malasan dalam artian menyerahkan sepenuhnya kepada Amerika. Oleh karena itu, kalau konsep CBDR tadi itu bukan negara berkembang menyerahkan tanggung jawab kepada negara maju, tapi negara maju itu wajib untuk membantu negara berkembang untuk bisa mengatasi perubahan iklim. Salah satu contohnya adalah bagaimana negara-negara maju ini harus mengumpulkan dana seberapa banyak, setahu saya banyak banget gitu, untuk diberikan kepada negara berkembang untuk kemudian diimplementasikan menjadi proyek-proyek pembangunan berkelanjutan seperti itu. Jadi tidak saling menyerahkan, tapi bagaimana kita bisa saling berkolaborasi.
Oke, paling segitu aja sih Kak. Thank you so much for all the answers. Itu udah sangat insightful buat kita semua dan of course ini sangat menarik topiknya. Thank you so much Kak Randy udah hadir di sini.
Oh iya. Oh ya boleh ini kita sebenarnya di LCDI juga sekarang lagi nyari intern buat communication gitu. Jadi kalau tertarik bisa lihat bisa DM di Instagram aja sih sebenarnya. Gitu.
Oke, itu buat teman-teman yang tertarik tuh udah bisa DM di mana Kak DM-nya?
Di Instagramnya LCDI, teman-teman cari lcdi@lcdi.id.
Oke, mungkin kakak ntar bisa share social handle-nya kakak yang bisa untuk kayak bantu teman-teman nyari account-nya itu untuk kayak kalau misalnya yang tertarik gitu kak. Oke, I think that's all for this session. Thank you so much Kak Putindi Gardian for filling us. Maybe I can give it back to the MC, Ratu. You can take the lead.
Okay.
Okay. Am I audible right now?
You're audible.
Okay, cool. All right, everybody. This ends the whole Green Welfare Festival 02. Though there were some technical difficulties here and there, we've completed our 3 amazing days. And we hope that all of you got some new insights and are moved to make a difference for our climate future. And as we all know, small actions can make a big difference. Start where you are and use what you have. Thank you all so much for attending, and see you at our upcoming event. And also, don't forget to follow Green Welfare Indonesia's Instagram, which is at greenwelfare.id. And don't forget to fill in the attendance form. And before we officially end this, let's take a picture together. So everybody, please turn on your camera if you can.